Blow up our balloon. Okay, ready? Do this with me. Three inhales. Ready? And deflate, let it out. Do it again for me. Inhale. Let it out. We want to do it 3 times. This time, try to make your exhale longer than your inhale. Here we go. And nice and long. And taking those breaths, inhaling and exhaling can really just help calm, whether we're an adult or whether it's for your children. And I think especially during these times we're in right now, anything we can do to help our children learn to calm and self-regulate is just truly a strategy worth learning. All right. In case you're interested in learning more about that, I'm obviously not going to spend a lot of time on that today, but all of those things I'm talking about, that Brain Smart Start, activities to connect with children, whether you're a parent, whether you're a teacher, there's some really great ideas in a book called I Love You Rituals by Conscious Discipline. And just so you know, I have 3 different video links that I've given to Fernando. One of them is called I Love You Rituals by Conscious Discipline. It's just a sweet, really powerful video, watching adults, well, actually not just adults, children connecting with each other. So just if you're interested in that, it's a short video, but really powerful and really just, I like to show that a lot when I'm talking about connecting with each other. All right, we have calmed ourselves. Hopefully that engaged your brains and you're all focused on our time together. Here's what we're going to cover in our short time together. I really want to talk about how review how communication and language skills develop the first 5 years. A lot is happening in those first 5 years. Explore the brain's role in the development of these skills. Understand the milestones, lots of milestones at each, no matter what age you are, what do those milestones look like from age birth to 5 years old? And then what are some strategies, what are some tangible strategies you can walk away with today to help support early communication skills? All right, Fernando, here we go. This is our first polling question. We're talking about language development. When does it all begin? Fernando, you want to launch that for us? Here we go. At what age do language skills begin to develop? There's one answer, one correct answer. So everyone go ahead and vote. Choose your age. Is it at birth, 3 to 6 months, 6 to 12, or 12 to 18 months? We'll give you about a minute to vote. Fernando is, and Natalie, we have 2 people, they're monitoring the polls for us. When they see that most people have voted, they're going to launch the results. I can't see the results right now, but when he launches those, we can all see those. Oh, there we go. All right, 80% of you are correct. It is at birth. So many times we don't think about that. We think, you know, gosh, it's not, they're just born. They don't, what could they possibly understand? So it's very logical. A lot of people do think it's a little bit later, 3 to 6 months or 6 to 12 months. But what I want you to walk away today knowing and realizing is that the minute a baby is born, the senses kick in, they come into this world, and hearing takes place as the brain begins to wire for every sound, every experience. And from that moment on, language begins to develop and communication skills. So good. Thank you for participating in our poll. We have one more a little bit later. So let's talk more about that. This is Dr. PamShiller, our lead author in every curriculum that FrogStreet has. I want you to read her quote, and I want you to really think about what she's saying. Her quote says, "What you teach me birth to 3 will be what matters most to me. What you teach me 3 to 5 will be what makes me grow and thrive." And I mentioned earlier, those first few years of life are so crucial. Let's look at the statistics that support that. Current brain research tells us by age 3, the brain has already achieved 80 to 85% of its wiring foundation. Think about that for a minute. They've only been on this earth 36 months, and that much, up to 85% of the brain is already being wired. Look a little bit beyond that. By age 5, 95% of the brain has been wired. So they haven't even stepped their big toe into kindergarten. So we have a really important job. And I say this with all of my heart, all of you out there, anyone who has dealing with little ones, whether you're a parent or an educator, we have the most important job because of this statistic right here. We are laying the foundation for future learning. Everything we're doing, especially when it comes to language development, because we're going to see in a little bit that the vocabulary level of a child at age 6 is the predictor of their reading comprehension 10 years later. Think about that. So how do we do that? How do we help build a rich vocabulary for children at this age? I like this picture. I thought it really gives you a nice visual of the wiring. Look, so at birth, you can see there's just a little bit of wiring because the baby like I said earlier, comes into this world and senses kick in and starts to bring in outside data and wiring begins to take place. Look, by 15 months, even more wiring, and by 2 to 3 years, that circuitry is really strong if the child has had some positive relationships and positive experiences. So what do I mean by windows of opportunity? It's a fertile time when the brain is able to wire a specific skill at an optimum level. So that's our goal, right? How do we optimize learning for children? How do we optimize language development? If so much needs to happen by age 5, how do we optimize the learning and the communication skills of children by that age? So here's our chart, windows of opportunity. Just so you know, this is not FrogStreet's chart. And what's interesting is it doesn't even belong to educators, to education. This chart is from neuroscience. It tells us how the brain wires and at what ages. So take a look here. Just to give you an example, I see, look under the very top under emotional intelligence, trust. So you can see there right at birth, trust begins to wire. So when my little grandson, Riley, was born and he was hungry and he cried, and the minute someone came along and picked him up and fed him and met that need, trust began to wire in his little brain. So we're here to focus on language. Look at the bottom there. What age does language begin to develop? We answered that in the poll question, right at birth. You can see there 4 to 8 months is the wiring opportunity for early sounds. So we need to expose babies at that age to activities and experiences that will wire for early sounds. Vocabulary, that for those first 2 months is huge for wiring for vocabulary. But you see in that third column, greatest enhancement, we have all the way up to 7 to 10 years to enhance vocabulary. So how do we make the most of that? How do we really make sure that we're maximizing the window of opportunity for language in a child's life? By the way, I have a video, it'll be the second video link that Fernanda will share with you all. It's Dr. PamShiller, and she's talking about the windows of opportunity. So I hope you take a moment, take some time afterwards to click on that link. It's a great video. It's really short. I want to say maybe 3 minutes, but I think you'll find it very interesting, and it really pertains to what we're talking about right now. Oh, there you go. There's the name of it, Windows of Opportunity by PamShiller. All right. I told you earlier that you have the most important job. What we're doing, laying that foundation for future learning, is more important than just about anything in a child's life. We are not babysitters. We are so much more than that. And I like to remind people, when someone says, what do you do for a living? Here's what you can say. So you can say, you know what I do? I am a brain architect. I am building brains for future learning. It's probably the most important job there is, because all of that future learning to grade 12 really matters depending on these early formative years. Here's what children need for a brain to thrive and really develop. They need positive experiences and meaningful relationships with adults. That's what builds brain architecture. Now, is every experience in a child's life going to be positive? Absolutely not. That would be impossible. But as long as those positive experiences outweigh the negative, and that child has a positive positive relationships, then the brain wiring will be stronger. Here's something I want you to walk away with. That sentence in red. Repetition strengthens that wiring. This is a really important factor that comes into play with language development. So here's an early brain research key finding that we know. Experiences wire the brain, repetition strengthens that wiring. And this is where I want you to walk away knowing when it comes to language development and communication skills, this repetition is key. And sometimes we have to remind people, I hear parents or teachers sometimes say, my kid doesn't need to do that. They've already done that before. And that's where we need to come back and say, you're right, they have done that before, but they need to do it again and again and again to strengthen that wiring. So I have a visual for you here. I think this will help you understand a little better. So you know how children love, love, love to hear the same stories over and over and over, right? They can hear the story 100 times. Well, think about this next time that's happening. So the first time a child hears a story, there's some wiring in the brain. It's kind of weak. It's like a dirt road, like you see on my screen there. Next time they hear the same story a second time, the connections are a little bit stronger now. It's kind of like upgrading from a dirt road to a gravel road. Third time they hear the same story. Now those connections are really a little stronger and a lot faster, kind of like being upgraded to pavement. Hear the same story a fourth time. We're getting tired of it, but guess what? Those neural connections are really a lot stronger and faster. The wiring is much stronger. And now they hear the same story a fifth time. It's like having an interstate. Those neural connections need that repetition to strengthen the wiring. So when it comes to language, when it comes to reading books and singing songs, that repetition, I know we as adults may get tired of it, but remember this key fact that repetition strengthens the wiring. All right, so we know this about a brain, and we know this as we're educators. We need to focus on 4 domains to really develop the brain, whether it's a cognitive skill, like problem solving, social and emotional skills are important, absolutely physical, fine and gross motor. But this morning, our focus is on language development. What do we do to focus on that particular domain for children birth to 5? Well, it's all about intentionality. And I want to pause here for a minute because it doesn't happen by accident. The language development of children starting at birth will not happen without intentional practice, very purposeful activities and experiences. So let's read the definition. What does that mean? Well, to be intentional is to act purposefully with a goal in mind and a plan for accomplishing it. So I have a target there. You see my bullseye. So if someone said to me, okay, Lisa, I'll give you $1,000 if you can hit the bullseye, throw a dart and hit the bullseye on that target. How intentional would I be if I could win $1,000? I would be very intentional. I would not just flippantly walk by and throw a dart without aiming, would I? I would aim, I would do everything I can. I would practice, I would repeat that practice and aim purposefully to hit that bullseye because I have a goal in mind. I want you to approach language development in children the same way. When you're doing an activity, think about what's the purpose here? You're trying to build vocabulary. You're trying to create dialogue and have back and forth conversation if children are a little bit older. So we're going to talk about, well, how do you do that? How do you build those steps going from cooing in a baby up to having a two-way conversation with a preschooler? I have a little Pinterest emblem here, and don't get me wrong, I love Pinterest. I used it for my daughter's wedding, but it's not very intentional for building brains and for optimizing learning. And I say that in just because of many times as a teacher, I would go to Pinterest and have a cute activity. But when we're talking about intentionality and purposefully building dialogue, Pinterest isn't our go-to. We need to have strategies in place to know how to build that language. Okay, so I want a little participation here. Here's a question for you. What are the characteristics of an intentional educator? And by that might be the teacher, caregiver, parent, whatever ideas you have. I'd like you to type some in the chat box and I'll read a few out loud. What are your ideas for what is a characteristic of an intentional educator? So let's see if I can type in the chat box. Here we go. I'm going to read the chat box. Creative follows the interests of a child, observer, reflective, consistent, patience. I see calm, teaching in the moment. That's good. Meeting the child's needs. Oh boy, these are going fast. Flexible, lesson planner, conversationalist, an active listener. Good. Knowledgeable. I like that. A lot of following the child's interests. Being developmentally appropriate. Hands-on. Goodness, they're going fast. I'll read a few more here. Having a positive relationship, making it fun, making it loving. Good. Talker, communicative, teaching in a fun way. Thank you. Thank you for participating. I see a lot having to do with being a listener and following the child's interests. Okay, so, and confident. Thank you. Thank you for participating. So there are a few great, every one of those ideas definitely pertains to being intentional. I have a little, let's see here, there we go. I have some chart here, and you're going to see some of those ideas that you just mentioned about what it means to be intentional. First of all, hold on, I've got to move my picture here. Focusing on developmental domains to help drive instruction. So I mentioned those earlier. We know that when we're doing an activity, it's specifically designed to meet an objective either in the cognitive domain, it might be physical. Today we're focusing on the language domain. Also, understanding the sequence of development and uses these continuums as the framework. So you understand, you know that certain skills follow a developmental sequence and the activities you choose meet that sequence. Okay, we talked about windows of opportunity. You already know a little bit more about that. You understand what that means and you accommodate the individual differences and the temperaments and the personality styles to meet those needs. All right, you provide a balance of experiences. You don't just focus on language all day long. We have a balance of experiences in the physical domain, social, emotional. We take turns, we have discussions, it's two-way. So you absolutely provide a balance of experiences to be intentional. And then lastly, I love this one. You select your materials and your activities and your songs with a purpose. You know that if you have a particular center out, maybe it's a puzzle center, whatever it is, it's not just to fill space, it's not just to fill time. You know that there's an objective in mind to meet a need and develop a skill. So what are some of those we can do for to develop language? Now I'm going to pause here for a minute because I feel like we're fine on time. Natalie, do we have any burning, looming questions that I need to stop and pause and answer right now?
We have one from Evelyn, and it says, how would you handle a parent that is very delicate with their child?
I don't know, can you define delicate? I mean, I don't know if you can probably get that.
They're saying they're just always smothering the child or always pampering them.
It's probably a firstborn, I'm guessing. You know, that's a whole other content, a whole other session. Honestly, I think we model by example, and we help parents become confident in their child's abilities. And so many times, I know the parents when I taught, you know, they would do everything for their children, and maybe that's what you need. And just modeling for them and saying, you know, and I don't know what age we're talking about here, but really modeling and showing that parent saying, look, Susie can take her coat off and coat on and hang it up and put her backpack up. And we're not doing that for her. She's doing it all by herself. Just showing the parent that, just building that confidence in them for their own child's abilities. And I'm not sure if that answered directly, but hopefully that helped.
Great, thank you. That was all.
Great. All right, so we mentioned this earlier. Communication skills begin long before that first word is spoken. That's why the title of this training today is not just about language skills. We also called it communication skills, because there may not be a word spoken, but a child can definitely communicate to you how they're feeling, even if they're nonverbal. We all know that. So let's do polling question number 2. Ready? So Fernando, you want to launch this? We've already talked about when it will begin. Now we'll talk about how does it begin. The question is, which strategy below does not help to develop language skills in infants? One of them does not help. So why don't you, everybody, take the poll, make your answer, and then we'll see what the results are. I'm curious to see if you'll get what you get on this one. It's a little bit of a trick question. Oh, I didn't fool too many people. Okay, you are right. Watching television is the one of those activities that really does not help to develop language in infants. Now, I do see the playing peekaboo. That's the one I kind of threw in there. Sometimes people think playing peekaboo is not beneficial to language, but I want you to think about it this way. Any interaction, any social interaction with an infant, and we're talking about infants. So let me define what is an infant. Generally, for infants, we mean ages birth to 18 months. Toddlers, we kind of categorize as 18 to 36 months. And then you have the 3-year-olds, 36 to 48 months, and then the preschoolers, 4 and 5. So we're talking about infants. Peekaboo with an infant is a wonderful interaction, playful, all kinds of dialogue. They're learning more. They're also learning socially, but I want to focus on the language. You doing the peekaboo, generally, you're thinking about your voice inflection. It goes up because it's playful and joyful. So anytime, any interaction is considered a language development opportunity. Watching television. All right, I may have opened a can of worms here, especially when we're all homebound and in a pandemic. But I want you to think about about television. I have a, let me close this out. Look at my next slide here. Here's what we know. We know that the more time babies spend watching television, without a doubt, the more slowly they learn to talk. There's a definite connection. And I know I may be sometimes, you're thinking, but wait, I know it's beneficial, but here's what I want to talk about. My slide here says, TV is linked with slower language acquisition because television time ends to displace conversation time between babies and adults. All right, now think about that. I keep talking about interaction, about relationships, about experiences. You are a constant narrator all day long. Whether you're changing their diaper and singing a song, whether you are looking out the window and talking about the birds that they see in the sky, maybe they're feeling something, smelling a flower. It may be a toddler talking about how it feels, how it smells, building. It's all about exposure. All of that vocabulary, everything they're hearing is being accumulated into their little brains and being wired. It doesn't seem like it because you're not hearing it. They can't verbalize it yet. But they're gathering that knowledge and that vocabulary level, even if they're not talking. Now, I don't want to, I don't want you to misunderstand me. Television isn't the evil medium here. It's the content and the information on the television. So what I'm trying to encourage, we're talking about infants, is interaction, that face-to-face interaction. My slide here says, when it comes to learning speech, nothing beats a live conversation. Now, can preschoolers learn something from watching, I'm going to date myself here, Blue's Clues? I don't know if that's still on television. Absolutely. It was shown that children who watched Blue's Clues did gain some problem-solving skills. So again, I'm not saying television is the evil medium here. It's the information on it. We know infants will not learn language if they're placed in front of a television passively. What they will gain, where they will gain their knowledge and their language skills will come from that live conversation. I'm going to pause here for a minute before we get into the cues and think about this. Think about our world today. And what is it full of? Cell phones, right? These cell phones take over our life. My world, when I was raising my young girls, we didn't have cell phones. And so if you think about the world before cell phones, and I can't see me, but if I was holding my baby, and I was feeding them, the distance, this is just miraculous to me. The distance from their head, let me see if you can from their head in my arms to my eyes is the exact distance that an infant needs to focus. They can focus exactly from here to here. Now, what happens if I'm a young mother holding my infant and I'm trying to multitask, I'm trying to get a lot done, I'm feeding my baby over here, but I've got my phone over here. What does my baby see? My baby's not looking at my eyes and connecting and loving and having that direct eye contact. I'm not fully present as a mom because I'm over here, because I'm trying to get something done, right? Which I totally get because we're all multitasking. So think about that when you're trying to be conscientious about language development. Being fully present, whether you've got that infant in your arms, feeding them and singing a song. Like I said earlier, narrating as your day goes, even if it's changing the diaper. That constant presence and that constant language is what's going to build language. All right, let's take a look here at what does communication look like at different ages. So I have first, newborns, 6 weeks old. Even though it's not verbal and I may not be hearing words, we know that smiling and cooing, it melts our heart, doesn't it? That is a form of communication. A few months later, in 3 to 4 months, they're going to build into laughter. They start babbling. That's those first signs of communication. And the more these babies begin to laugh and to coo and to babble, what happens with us as adults? Oh, we just love it. We just get right in there and start to react. So the more we interact and respond to that, that builds a foundation for that back and forth interaction and just that is what I want to call the back and forth exchange, because that's what we're looking for eventually as children begin to converse. So the foundation of intentional communication is set through parent-child interaction. This is what we're looking for, those back and forth exchanges. Don't just, so many times we want to be the talker and we're getting in there and singing and talking, but stop for a moment and be the listener. Even with an infant, even if, we pause for a moment and give them a chance to respond. Whatever your role is, whether you're the parent, whether you're the caregiver, the teacher, the more responsive you are actually affects the vocabulary, because the more responsive you are means a larger vocabulary for the babies, even by 15 months old. Think about that. That is a huge impact. Be responsive, pause, be a listener, and try to get those back and forth exchanges even at an early age. All right, here, this is a nice slide. Just kind of walks you through all of the stages of language development. So like I said before, those first 3 months, it's all about crying. If I have a need, the only way I can express my need is by crying. But eventually I move into cooing, we move into the babbling. We start to hear those first words right around a year, give or take a few months. And you can see on the right side there how it really begins to build. They start to put words together. 2 to 5 years, some of you that have those older toddlers and some of those preschoolers, that language is just exploding. It just seems to everything that they've accumulated and gathered over all these years, we start to hear, and it becomes so exciting. So what can we do to increase that language exposure, especially that vocabulary level? Well, I thought, I started thinking about who you are. I don't know everyone out there. We have over 1,000 participants. All of you have a variety of children that you're dealing with. So I thought what I would do is kind of break it down. What are the milestones for each age group? We already talked about the ones younger than a year. So what are the milestones of a child 12 to 18 months? Now let me pause here for a minute. This is a wide window. You know that developmentally, if we've got children who aren't quite doing this or children who are past that, that's completely normal. But just this is a very general guideline of milestones and language milestones from 12 to 18 months. So what do we have? Several times children will begin to say their first word. However, they can't walk and talk at the same time. That's a skill not quite mastered. We know that 18-month-old, right? They're beginning to say the word no and they mean it meaningfully. They might start be putting 15 to 20 words together. That depends. They begin to refer to themselves. They're starting to understand that they are separate than others. 18 to 24 months, look what's happening. Their words, their vocabulary is really building. They might be able to name some common items. They can start to engage in some conversation, and they might even start to ask a few questions. About 80% of the time, they might be able to be understood. I know my granddaughter at this age we could not understand her, but she was definitely talking and thought she knew what she was saying. But we could not quite understand her. Okay, 24 to 36 months. They're really starting to put multiple words into a sentence. They can point to a book and name some common items. They can start to identify up to at least 6 body parts, and they can start to answer some simple questions with more than just a yes or no, a response. The big thing here is they can start to follow some directions, really short, intentional directions, not a long sentence, but just maybe a direction that would only be not more than 2 or 3 steps. By 3.5, now we're getting into the 3-step directions beyond that. They know shapes. They might know some size words, descriptions. They start to understand a little bit about how many. And then by 4 years, I want to talk a little bit more about what does that mean, receptive language and expressive language. They start to really understand about time and how and when. When they express themselves, they're really able to understand what it means about today or tomorrow, or past tense, yesterday. And look at 5 years. Boy, their language is booming. It really starts to build that vocabulary. They can really express themselves or retell a story. They can talk about what happened in the past, and they can really start to understand empathy, and they start to have questions about feeling. So this is a big jump. Think about how short of a time 5 years really is, and all of these milestones that we've hit in such a short time. How do we do that? This is the question. How do we reach, I'm gonna go back a slide. How do we get to this point where a child can successfully reach these big milestones in language by 5 years? Well, it's all about providing a language-rich environment. Whether this is at home, whether this is in the classroom, anywhere you are, I want you to be cognizant, be intentional, be aware that everything this child is hearing all day long is making an impact on their future vocabulary. It says here that the size of children's vocabulary, along with their ability to discriminate sounds, are 2 of the most acclaimed predictors of how easily they will learn to read. So think about this for a minute. This is impactful. So if you have an 18-month-old, see the picture there, if they are in a talkative environment, by that short time, they will already have up to 185 more vocabulary words than the rest of their peers that are not in a language-rich environment. Look what happens at 2 years old. If they're in a talkative environment, they already have the advantage of 295 more vocabulary words than their peers that are not. Look by age 5, by school age, it's leaps and bounds. If we have children in a language-rich environment with singing, talking, lots of reading, lots of exposure to vocabulary, they already have an advantage of 1,500 more vocabulary words than children who are not in the same environment. So again, it goes back to being intentional and choosing activities that we know are enriching and purposeful for dialogue, to build dialogue. All right, do I need to pause here? Natalie, I see a few questions building. Do I need to stop here or do we want to wait till the end? What do you think?
Yeah, there are a few questions that are kind of repetitive if you want to answer them.
Sure.
So one of them was, how do you let a parent know this about television or anything? And also including that when parents are in denial.
That's a tough question. You know, I think what we do, you know, okay. I mean, we all know that telling a parent how to parent doesn't go very well, including telling my own daughter how to parent. You know, what in FrogStreet, what we have, and you don't have to get this off of FrogStreet, you can probably look it up anywhere. There is so much good information online. I would look up an article that just I would not single out a parent. I wouldn't just give it. If you think that one parent particularly, you know, maybe sets their baby in front of a television too much, just give it to everyone that you know, all the parents in the room, and say, you know, I just got this really good information about language development and things that will help children and things that kind of interrupt that process. And just give it to everyone and hope. I know there's, you know, we can't always make everyone read everything we send home, but I would use those free resources. My slide today that talked about the television being, you know, kind of interrupting the language process, that was on a website today. So you just Google that. I would find a short, don't get it too long. I would keep it, not too high level. I think it's the shorter, to the point, and just, you know, an easy to read article that you can give to all parents. Like I said, don't single anyone out, and just kind of hopefully they'll read those and I just think any information we can give to parents is beneficial. So just keep that line of communication open and let them know you're their partner in parenting.
Another question was, do you have any inclusion materials for children?
Meaning what?
I'm not sure. That was just the question.
Inclusion question well, the person who sent that, do me a favor and maybe you can elaborate a little bit more and then we'll come back to it. Okay.
And then another question was, what if a child is bilingual? Would they have more words than 18 at 18 months?
Yes, and I had a feeling that might come up. Our curriculum is bilingual, and I am not the right person for that question. Unfortunately, I am not bilingual, and I have many colleagues, well, not many, we have a bilingual expert on my professional development team that definitely answers all of those questions, especially when it comes to language development. So I don't know if we said that, Fernando, if there's a way that someone can reach me, I'm happy to give my email address, and anybody who has questions about that, I'm happy to direct them to my colleague.
Okay.
Okay. I'm sorry?
I said we'll let them know after.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to go ahead and keep going just because I want to get through some of my slides. Here's what we know. Receptive language develops much earlier than expressive language. We know that, right? We know that children can understand us far earlier than a child can put words together and verbalize. So what does that mean? Receptive language, right here. The ability to take in language and to understand, including being able to follow directions, understand a story, and understand figurative language. My granddaughter, before she could say a word, a bunch of adults were in the room in the den, and we couldn't find the television remote, and we were talking about it. Where's the remote? I don't know, who has it? Is it under the couch? Where could it be? And she was probably not even 2, and she toddles over, and guess what? She picks over the remote. There's no way she could have verbalized that, but she knew, she could understand. Her receptive language was developing appropriately way before expressive language. So what is expressive language? That's the language skills that encompass the many ways of conveying a message. It involves getting a meaning or a message across to others, and that does not just mean with words. It could be with feeling, it can be with sounds, and it can be with sign language. So I want to pause here for a minute and emphasize this. So a lot of times sign language can be misunderstood, but this is a huge way to develop language, especially for those children. How do you communicate if they're nonverbal? Well, what are the benefits? Signing has lots of benefits. Number one, it gives a child a way to communicate before they can say a word verbally, which in turn decreases frustration for adults and for children. I've got a child who's crying and I don't have a clue what's wrong. If they can tell me, do something and show me a sign to tell me what's wrong, that decreases frustration for everyone. Believe it or not, sign language also actually develops larger vocabularies. And the other thing it does is it builds a bond between the child and the adult, because we're able to communicate, and that builds a bond, making me close because you understand me. In case you're not familiar, I thought we might practice a few. Now, when I say sign language, don't become intimidated. Don't feel like you've got to go out and learn how to become fluent in sign language. What I'm recommending is just learning a few key words and teaching those to children so that you can give a child a way to communicate. So let's practice a few, all right? This means finished. I don't know if I'm trying to get finished, all done. Maybe they're done with the high chair and they're all done and they want out. Look at the word more. You know, we've got a child who's hungry and they want another snack or some more food, it takes a lot more to try, as a toddler, to try to form my lips and my teeth and my tongue to say the word more. But it's a lot easier just for me to put my 2 fingers together and say more. If I want some food, I can do this, just eat. And that just means that I need food, which makes a lot of sense. My tips for sign language, if you're new to this and you're thinking, okay, maybe I'll try it. Here are my tips. Start out simply. Don't get too overwhelmed. Just pick a few and be consistent and be repetitive. My biggest tip that I can give you, please say the word when you sign. I have right here, I have the sign for family. A lot of times we talk about my school family. So I had a teacher one time ask me, she said, well, if we're always using sign language, how will a child ever learn how to talk? And she thought that you were doing the sign language in place of the language, and absolutely not. You're putting, when I'm saying thank you or please, I always say the word with the sign. That's important. And sign their favorite objects. If they love a particular ball or a baby doll, learn that sign, and that's so the child will be even more interested in signing. It's a huge leap for learning language. So what are some strategies you can walk away with today to learn and support early communication skills? Number one, tune in. Be fully present. Don't be abstracted. Don't be distracted on that phone or using a television. Tune in and be fully present with a child. Number two, talk more. I think I've said it 20 times already. Constantly narrate, constantly sing, read, do those finger plays. All of those things are building in a young baby's brain to build language. And when I say take turns, that's that back and forth exchange. It's amazing to see a child, again, it's that stopping, talking, and stopping to listen. And as children get older, having that back and forth dialogue and learning to have a conversation is a huge benefit of language development. Here's another strategy for you. Noticing and labeling, this is something I noticed when I did the chat box earlier and I asked you what did it mean to be intentional. Several of you said follow the child's lead or follow what the child is interested in. That's huge. At those teachable moments, and maybe you're outside and a butterfly comes and lands on a flower, right then talk about that butterfly and how it looks and what just happened and how it landed on the flower, because that you can tell by a child's gaze exactly what they're fixed on, and use that moment to build language. These two things are something I want you to do. I think you probably already do this naturally, but it's a very effective strategy for building language. The first one is called expansion. Now, what do I mean by that? A child may say a broken sentence. They aren't ready for complete sentences. They might say truck, fast, or bee, ouch. What expansion means is you add to that sentence and use a lot more detail and make it more complex. So you might say, oh, yes, the bee will sting you. That will hurt. Ouch. Or yes, the truck is going fast. It's racing to the fire. So you're just taking their few words of a sentence and expanding it to make it more complex. That's the first strategy. Second is recasting. Now, what do I mean by that? And I think as adults, we do this naturally. You're just modeling the sentence in the correct way with correct grammar. So if the child says, put shoes on my foot, you're just repeating it the same way and saying, oh, you want me to help me put your shoes on your feet. So using the correct grammar, it happens very naturally, very lovingly, not in a punitive, correction way. This is an important one, shared reading. I can't say it enough. Read from infancy on, having these reading experiences, reading aloud, whether it's a read aloud in a class setting with a whole group or whether it's one-on-one with a parent and a child or a teacher-child, keep children engaged. Ask about the illustrations. Ask what's going to happen next. Make a connection. What is the character feeling? What do you think this is going to happen here? Ask those questions to make it interactive. It's not just a one-way experience. We have something in FrogStreet that I want to just tell you about, because it's actually just went live about a week ago. In a minute, I'm going to share a link with you. We have exactly what I'm talking about. It's a parent portal. It's free. We have several books. This gives you an example of what it looks like. You have a book online, and then what the beauty of it is, because a lot of times, especially if you're a parent, you don't know what to say before the book, or not sure what questions do I ask after the book. We give you exactly what to do before and what to do after, and it's really a very teacher-friendly, very parent-friendly, and again, like I said, it is free. This link again it's one of the links that, let's go back, that Fernando has. So out of the 3 links, this is the last link, parents.frogstreet.com, and it's a great resource, absolutely free, and those read alouds are exactly what we're talking about, to engage children and make a read aloud become interactive. Look at this quote here by Jim Trelease. Children develop 3 times more high-level vocabulary from listening to a story than from conversation. I don't know about you, but my daily conversation among my family and my children aren't always really high level, but we want children exposed to those rich vocabulary words. So many times, those are the words that they hear in books and hear stories. Please don't shy away from that. Sometimes I see teachers, I get to go in a lot of classrooms around the country, and a teacher might change a word and think, well, that's too hard. They can't, they're not going to understand that. It's about exposure. Children need to hear those high-level words. Let me give you an example here. This is a book that we have in a few of our different curriculums, The 3 Little Pigs. And here's what's so special about this book. It's actually written at 3 different levels, depending on the child's developmental level, whether it's, they might not be quite ready, they might not have an advanced vocabulary or maybe a really short attention span. So I would just stick to level 1. But they might be ready to bump over and actually hear level 3, especially if they're an older preschooler. So I'm going to read a part of level 3, and I want you to be listening for some rich vocabulary words, some really high level words that probably we don't always use in our daily conversation. All right, here we go. One fine spring day, Mother Pig gathered her 3 little pigs around her. Little pigs, you must go out into the world and seek your own fortunes. So the 3 little pigs packed their belongings into 3 leather backpacks. They kissed their mother goodbye, and they ambled down the road thinking about what they would do first. Jiggity jig, jiggity jig, 3 little pigs. All right, I'm going to pause there for a minute. So tell me some of the words that you heard, some really rich words. And I'm going to check the chat box here. What are some words that you heard? Seek, gathered, belongings, ambled. A lot of people are putting fortunes, leather backpacks, a lot of rich description there. Thank you. That's exactly what I wanted you to say. I don't know about you, but at the end of the day in my classroom, I'd probably say, okay, kids, line up and get your stuff, right? What if I said, let's gather our belongings? What would happen? They start to use those words. What about the word ambled? I don't know about you, but that's not a word I typically use in my daily conversation. But let's talk about that for a minute. What does it mean to amble down the road? Well, it means to walk slowly. Boys and girls, when could we walk slowly? What if we all ambled down the hallway out to the playground? Do you think some pre-K children could start to understand that word? Absolutely. So what I want to encourage you is to think about that. Don't shy away from those rich words. Use them, expose children to that rich vocabulary. It makes a big difference. All right, I think we're winding down here. Here's just a nice quote that I want you to walk away with. Tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn. It's all about interaction. Involve that infant, involve that toddler, involve that preschooler. So I think this is a perfect time. We just have about 5 or 6 minutes. We can just reflect. I wanted to kind of recapture here a few things that we learned, that we talked about. So we've talked about how less TV for infants is more effective. We talked a lot about back and forth language interaction, sign language, following a child's interest. And I mentioned to you expanding sentences and recasting their sentences, and really a lot about modeling correct language and those shared read alouds and building vocabulary and exposing them to rich vocabulary. It's a lot in our time, just in a short 60 minutes. Talk to me. So is this a good time? Natalie, you want to share some questions and I can hopefully provide some answers?
Sure. One of them says, how can you, or is it important for early intervention?
The most important. The earlier, the better. I will tell you, it's, that windows of opportunity slide that I showed you, it's not a lost cause. Don't feel like, gosh, I got this child when they're 3 and I've already lost, or maybe 4, and I've already lost those first valuable 36 months. It's not too late. Children are extremely resilient. The earlier, the better, yes. Early intervention is key, but please know that that window of opportunity goes pretty much all the way up until puberty. The brain may not wire to the optimum level that it could have, but you still have a lot of time up till puberty.
Thank you. Another one says, what age does or will a preemie start their language development?
It'll be, there's not a magical age. What is consistent is the developmental stages. Those stages I showed you that started with crying, cooing, babbling, and kind of as it builds, those stages are chronological. They will always happen in the same order, but we do not know that the age, I can't name an age. We don't know that. Even with typically developing children, whether we have special needs or typically developing children, the ages they vary, but just know that the stages of language development will be the same. They'll be in order.
Are there any red flags on delays with infants or language development?
With infants, I wouldn't say so. I mean, just because, I'm trying to think here. Gosh, this is such a it's kind of, I'm opening a can of worms. So because of what I mentioned earlier about receptive language developing before expressive, it's hard for us to know sometimes, you know, you're thinking, they're not talking, they're behind. I would say look for the receptive language cues. Infants, if we're talking babies younger than 12 months old, they're not talking, but as they get to be 18 months old, if they're not making eye contact, if they're not turning, when you say their name and they're not turning and recognizing that, I would look more for responses to see if they're understanding more than if they're doing anything verbally.
Should I be alarmed if a child isn't meeting the milestones?
No, and I think, you know, all of you, I think, you know, I think that's the biggest thing is even as all of us, as parents, as grandparents, as educators, you know, it would be so nice if we just knew that every milestone was absolutely going to be met at a certain time. Typically, children, you know, so many times I see is when we're talking about language, they're accumulating all of this information and it just seems to just delay. And I've seen so many times children just explode all at once, and it may be delayed, but they've just been accumulating that knowledge all along. I would say typically I know our curriculum has what we call a developmental checklist where you can, you know, just check the date that they've mastered something, and it's for a typically developing child. You know, usually I would say more of a professional, like a pediatrician or someone might be able to really address something if you see some major delays. Otherwise, if you suspect something, I mean, just try and find a diagnostician or someone who can really identify those red flags. I mean, but typically a child is just trying to catch up and they're not really so far behind. They just haven't quite gotten there yet.
One more question was about, you had mentioned TV, but the question was, if TV does not develop children's language, does cell phones or tablets do the same?
Okay, this gets into I have a whole other session on technology. You know, here's the key. When you're talking about screen time in general, and let's define a screen as a television, an iPad, a cell phone, computer, okay? The key is, here's if you want to talk about if it's effective or not, is it interactive? If you put a child in front of a screen passively, and they're just watching something passively, especially younger, you know, infants and toddlers, that's not helpful for language development. If you've got the same child and the same iPad with an adult next to them and talking and asking questions and making it interactive and reflective, guess what? That same show or that same, whatever they're watching, that activity it does develop language skills because now it's become interactive. So that's the key. It's not necessarily the device, it's whether it's passive or involves interaction.
Perfect. Well, it looks like, just looking at the time, it looks like we are out of time for today. Lots of great positive feedback for Lisa. They really loved the session, and they're asking if they could have access to it. And unfortunately, we are recording this session, so we'll clean it up and we'll get it up online, hopefully within 24 hours, hopefully sooner than that. So you can go in and rewatch the session. As far as the resources, the video links, the PowerPoint slides, and everything that Lisa so kindly shared with us, you can find it on our website. And I've been sharing a link for everybody to have that handy. So let me go ahead and share it one more time before we close. And in that link, you can find, again, the webinar recording once we finish cleaning it up, all the resources that Lisa shared with us, plus any other sessions that you'd like to sign up for. I just want to thank again Lisa for her time and knowledge. It was a fantastic presentation. I want to thank everybody who managed to join in the session. We had a full house. Thank you so much for your patience. And I just want to remind everybody that all of the resources for this session and other sessions can be found on our website. So when in doubt, just go to our website and you will find what you're looking for most likely there. Also, feel free to contact us here at the association with any questions for us and for Lisa, and we're happy to send those over to her as well. Thanks again, Lisa, for your time. And thanks, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Stay healthy and safe out there, and we'll hope to see you on the next one. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Fernando.